Some TV dramas are timeless, others very much of their time, and a few come back into relevance. In the 70s, dystopia often seemed to be on writers' minds, creating several memorable television series, including today's subject, The Guardians. Welcome to Very British Futures, the podcast trying to shed new light onto old science fiction television. Today we're examining a grim but nuanced look at a one-party Britain, policed by a military organisation called the Guardians. This is no simplistic tale of tyranny and rebellion, however. The authorities, the resistance, and the civilians in between them are all depicted as complicated, flawed people driven as much by personal desires as their beliefs. My guest today knows more about this series than most because he's written a book on the Guardians and similar dramas due out from Obverse Books' Silver Archive range. He's writer and editor Steve Hatcher. Welcome to the podcast, Steve. How are you today?
I'm in fine fettle, thanks, Gareth. It's half-term holiday, so I haven't had to get up massively early to get my daughter to school, and all is good.
Oh, great stuff. Well, thank you very much for taking some time out to talk about The Guardians. The Guardians was made by London Weekend Television and broadcast in 13 hour-long episodes between the 10th of July and the 2nd of October 1971. Created by Rex Firkin and Vincent Tilsley and produced by Andrew Brown. The near future. After years of economic chaos, the democratic government has been replaced by a right-wing paternalistic state ruled by successful captain of industry and Prime Minister Sir Timothy Hobson. Political opposition of any kind is suppressed by a seemingly unaccountable paramilitary force called the Guardians of the Realm, or the Gs for short. Sir Timothy at first seems to be controlled by the Gs' leader, the General, but as the story progresses, he manoeuvres this mysterious officer into a cabinet position and claims ultimate authority. The government is opposed by a loose alliance of resistance cells, codenamed Quarmby. They're divided over the best way to fight the government. The more extreme members believe that staging violent actions and provoking the Guardians into increasingly brutal reprisals will turn public opinion against the government and galvanise the population into rebellion. The series follows characters on both sides of the conflict, including Cabinet Secretary Norman, Guardian Officer Tom Weston and his wife Claire, Sir Timothy's son Christopher, and psychiatrist Frank Benedict and his wife Eleanor. In the following discussion, there will be spoilers. And to start off with, my traditional question that I start off with is, how did you first encounter the Guardians?
Well, as we know, I'm very old, so I saw the Guardians on first broadcast in between July and October 1971. And when we look at this, we have to bear in mind always, this was primetime television. This was Saturday night primetime television. Now, Saturday night was go to my gran and granddad's house, which, without going into all that again, is the reason why I saw very little Doctor Who during the 60s. But what we did watch is we got to see things like The Saint and The Avengers and those light, frothy ITC. And yes, I know The Avengers is not ITC before someone writes in, but those light, frothy adventure serials that we got in those days. And then one Saturday night in July 1971, there was this thing that was very, very different and very terrifying. I probably should explain that it was particularly terrifying for me, I think, because I've always been political. I mean, I was at that stage, I was 12 going on 13. But I'd be involved in politics. But my dad had been a member of the Communist Party and was a very active trades unionist and all that sort of thing. So I was brought up knowing whose side I was on, who were the good guys and who were the bad guys and all that sort of thing. And quite clearly seeing The Guardians, which is about military takeover in Britain in the near future, in the early 80s, it's posited, rounding up communists and trade unionists and all that sort of business. I knew they'd be coming for us when this actually happened. And, and it's been interesting in recent years. I mean, obviously, it didn't happen. We didn't have a military takeover because the ruling class found a much more effective way of reasserting control with the election of the Thatcher government and all the wrong that they wrought over all those many years. So that's what we had instead. We had the working class and trade union movement basically destroyed by Thatcher rather than by the Guardians. But it did look at that stage as if it was a possibility, as if it might actually happen. The previous year, in 1970, the Conservatives had won the general election against the odds. Wilson was expected to win that election in 1970. He'd been Prime Minister since 1964 and had won again in 1966 with a sizable majority. Was expected to win in 1970 and didn't. So that was a setback. There was all sorts of anti-union legislation coming through from that government. There were the beginnings of a fight back in the form of strikes. A couple of years down the line, we'd have things like the 3-day week and the coal strike and all that sort of business, power cuts. But we weren't quite at that stage yet. We now know, interestingly enough, that there were actual, real, genuine meetings that took place between members of the ruling class to plan contingencies for a coup d'etat against Wilson. And that happened on at least 2 occasions in 1968, I think it is, without having it in front of me. And then again, when Wilson got back into power in the mid-70s, he got back into power in 74. And there were more meetings at that stage. And the late 60s one, if anybody watches the serial The Crown, which being such a lover of the royal family, of course, I haven't watched a single thing of it. No, I haven't watched it, but I have seen a clip where Lord Mountbatten comes in to tell the Queen, and of course we know this is fictionalized, but this is the story that we've since found out, that Mountbatten was at a meeting with I think Hugh Cudlip, the newspaper editor, and various other luminaries from the press and the intelligence services and so on. We know a lot about it from the Peter Wright book, Spycatcher. And the idea was to take over, to impose a military takeover, to lock down the BBC and Heathrow Airport and all that sort of thing, to arrest Wilson and his government, and to install Lord Mountbatten as an interim Prime Minister. And in The Crown, we see Queen Elizabeth basically saying, "You can forget that, matey. We're not going along with that," which I don't know what transpired there, but certainly that. Another story is that Mountbatten left that meeting and said, "I'm sorry, I'm having nothing to do with this. You're talking treason." So hey, there we are. So we know that there were things in the air in the early 70s. There'd been all sorts of stories in the press that Wilson was a Russian spy. All nonsense. I mean, it's an absolute echo of what happened to the first Labour government in the 1920s. People can look up something called the Zinoviev letter to see the smear campaign against the first ever Labour government in the 1920s, where they were accused of being spies for Russia. It's an old tale. So these things were in the air at that time, and it is reflected in television. Yes, well, there's the background. It was created by Rex Firkin and Vincent Tilsley, the Guardians. I've answered your first question at length, haven't I? Rex Firkin had created Manhunt in 1969. Vincent Tilsley had been a writer on the Forsyte Saga and on The Prisoner. He wrote The Chimes of Big Ben and Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, for that. John Bowen, who had a very, very long career, and far too many for me to list them all. I'll mention Villains, two of the Ghost Stories for Christmas, The Treasure of Abbot Thomas and the Ice House, Three Plays for Today, and he finished his career creating Hetty Wainthropp Investigates in the late 90s, which was based on a novel by David Cook, the first ever presenter of Rainbow, who was his life partner.
Thank you. That is all fascinating. Well, there you are. You've done all my work. It's been good, and thank you very much for listening. We'll be so.
Good night, all. Sorry about that, Gareth.
No, it's fascinating, especially the pedigree behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I didn't know about the Guardians really. I think I'd read about it. I had the book of TV science, the Encyclopedia of TV Science Fiction.
Yeah.
It gets a small entry in there.
It
Wasn't
does.
really aware of it until Network Video released it as
Yeah.
a DVD. And so it was always kind of on my radar. And then I think a little while ago, really, it was you suggested it was a program that you wanted to that you thought was worth talking about. So that's
Mm.
what finally girded me into watching it. And
But
I'm glad I have.
good. I mean, I've been talking about a military takeover in the Guardians. It's a little unclear. It looks. I don't. There doesn't seem to have been actual military
Mm,
takeover. They haven't
no.
marched into Heathrow Airport as the British Army did in the early, in the mid 1970s. Put an unofficial lockdown on Heathrow Airport, and apparently Harold Wilson and his secretary Marcia Williams were looking out the window, going, "This is a dress rehearsal for a coup, isn't it?" So they were convinced of that. So sorry, I should have mentioned that fact. So, no, it doesn't
Oh
look as
no.
if there's been that sort of military coup, because they
It
talk
doesn't.
about being a rigged election, don't they?
It feels like it's more of a populist kind of that they've come in on a tide of public
Hmm.
unhappiness about the
Yeah.
economic situation.
It
Uh,
resonates a bit, doesn't it, these days?
it does, especially with the kind of the prevailing all politicians are the same and they're all as bad as each
Yeah,
other. So
yeah,
you can believe that someone like this organization with Sir Timothy Hobson
yeah,
as their front man
yeah. A
could.
non-politician, small business.
There's a businessman coming in
Yes.
promising.
We just need to look over the channel, the Atlantic, to see exactly that happening, don't we? A businessman getting into power, an election that went differently from how most people predicted it, both times that he won. Well, and the time in
Mm.
the middle when he didn't as well, possibly. Not that I would want to cast any nasturtiums on the American electoral system, although it's deeply flawed. And he's got in and he's consolidated his grip on power, and who knows when he'll ever leave. Um, we've also got the parallel as well, is that the real power in the Guardians is the Guardians. You haven't got the
Mm.
army on the streets by any means, although the man in charge at the beginning of the serial is a guy called the General, who is spoken of in hushed tones as being this terrifying figure. And then we meet him, and he's this genial old buffer who's an old school friend of Sir Timothy Hobson, the Prime Minister, who they all
Mm.
call Rog.
Yes, one of the things I like about this series is it does just play with your expectations and a lot of the, well, rules, perhaps, so, but a lot of the kind of usual way you'd expect this to go because
Mm.
the general is built up as this sinister figure that everyone, as you say, talks about but he's never seen. You think, oh well, we're not going to meet him until episode 12 or 13. He's the big bad that we're waiting to meet.
And he's
And
dead by then,
then
of course.
yes, and then there's this complete and then relatively early on, I think it's about episode 5, it's the head of state episode.
It's
He
episode
is
three, actually.
Oh, episode 3. He's
Yeah,
actually revealed as you say, this. Oh, he barely says a word. He's not.
that's right.
He,
That's
he
right.
he's just kind of brought in this old buffer to the cabinet,
But
and
he's also got an aura of power, though, hasn't he? Although he doesn't
mm,
say much, he does have that aura of power about him. Yeah, we're starting talking there about the Guardians. The Guardians are a sort of they're not the army, but they're not the police either. They're like a private army acting on
mm,
behalf of, well, acting on behalf mainly of Norman. That's his surname. We find out later on in his first name is Dennis Norman, who is the cabinet secretary, a civil servant, and he's the real power in the land. He's very much controlling the Guardians, and
mm,
they're a paramilitary police force who Hobson actually wants to abolish and get rid of them because he recognises that they are brutal and unpleasant and undemocratic. But Norman won't have it and outmaneuvers him at every single step of the way.
mm.
Do they remind you of ICE at all in the United States at the moment?
There is yes, there is that element of ice, and they've kind of been recruited from a lot of men who shouldn't really be given any power,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
but undoubtedly are attracted to joining because it gives them a chance
Yes.
to do a bit of kicking back. So
So
they
we've
are,
got
but
no, I was going to
sorry,
say, so
carry on.
we've got different groups of characters, haven't we, who sort
Hmm.
of come into the story at different times, and then their narratives interweave. If we just talk about them, we've mentioned Sir Timothy Hobson, the Prime Minister, and Norman, the Cabinet Secretary, who have a lot of scenes together. We have Edward Petherbridge, very young Edward Petherbridge, playing
Mm.
Sir Timothy Hobson's son, Christopher. Christopher Hobson is the first one to cross over because but from one stream of narrative to other, I think, because we also
Mm.
meet John Collin playing Tom Weston, who is a sergeant then promoted to captain in the Guardians, who ostensibly is a member of the Guardians. He's one of the bad
Mm.
guys, and his young wife Claire, played by Mrs. McCluskey, played by Gwyneth Powell. Uh, Granger was Mrs. McCluskey. How lovely. And isn't she
Mm.
wonderful in this? Those two, I think, are fantastic. John Collin and Gwyneth
Absolutely.
Powell.
I was just reviewing it last night, the episode, and there's brilliant scenes. I mean, she can really hold the scene,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's a kind of show that does big close-ups on people, and it gives people
yeah.
quite long speeches.
It
We'll
does.
probably touch upon this
We may
style
do.
later on, and
And
she
then
absolutely
mm,
holds the
so, no, yeah,
scenes.
absolutely. And then the third stream is the government psychiatrist or psychologist, psychiatrist, the government psychiatrist, Dr. Frank Benedict,
Mm.
played by David Burke. And his wife, Eleanor Benedict, played by Lynn Fairley, who was in her early 20s at this point. She's a very young actress at this point, and is
Mm.
A, stunning in it, and B, stunning in it. Um,
Yes, in both
yeah,
senses. You amaze
absolutely.
me that she's in her 20s
Yeah.
because I assumed she was in her 30s, not because of her looks, but because the way she carries
Yes,
herself.
yes.
As
And
yeah.
some of the most powerful scenes as the stories intertwine are those between Gwyneth Powell's character and Lynn Farley's character, where it's
Mm,
just there's one episode, in fact, which would be episode, it's a penultimate episode, The Killing Trade, episode 12, where it's just the two of them sitting in a room talking for most of the episode. And they
mm,
are absolutely wonderful in that. Well, now Christopher Hobson. Well, no, let's start with Tom Weston. John Coyne playing Tom Weston, who, to all intents and purposes, is a Guardian's captain, Guardian's officer, and he disappears. And the reason he disappears, it transpires, is because all along he's a communist infiltrator in the Guardians, passing on secrets, doing all the things that we naughty communists do. Uh, so there we are. So that's that. So he disappears, and poor old Claire, Gwyneth Powell, doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't. She doesn't know where he's gone initially, and then she finds out, and she didn't know that he was a communist. Didn't know any of that. Well, while she's on her own and very lonely, she at the most with the most enormous coincidence in the series that the series does depend on, rather, she bumps into Christopher Hobson, Edward Petherbridge, while walking along by the Thames, and they start a relationship. So we've got that. She also starts seeing as a patient Dr. Frank Benedict. So they're brought into that line as well. So all of the lines of the story start coming together, and then as we follow those stories, we discover that David Burke's character, Dr. Frank Benedict, is a Quarmby. Now,
Mm.
a Quarmby, well, whenever you've got a sort of a authoritarian regime like that, you will get a resistance movement, and the Quarmbys are the beginnings of that effective resistance movement, carrying out some quite high-profile attacks, including assassinating Home Secretary Peter Howell, not the musician, the actor, Jeff Hollis, that is Jeff Hollis, who is another old friend of Sir Tim. And the strategy is to provoke the government to become more and more oppressive so people will see what a bad lot they are. Well, that
Mm.
doesn't work, shall we say, and it didn't work in real
No,
life because
it doesn't. It's a
no,
very poor philosophy that just involves a lot of innocent people getting hurt in the crossfire.
I suppose so, yes, but more to the point. I mean, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Mm.
All you get is you empower your enemy, take more and more drastic measures against you, and in the end, they're probably more powerful. I think I would draw the parallel again with the 70s through to the 80s, that I don't think the Labour movement in the 80s set out to provoke the ruling classes, although they did set out to win better rights, win better working conditions through powerful trade unions and the rest of it. And there were some people, I was involved in politics by that stage. I remember people putting forward this philosophy that we provoke
Mm.
the ruling class until they get more and more oppressive, and then people will go, "Oh, blimey, they're a bad lot." And it didn't happen. What we
Mm.
got instead was Thatcher. And Thatcher
Yes.
basically destroyed the working class movement, or set it back 50 years at the very least.
There's a
Yeah.
nice scene where Benedict meets the communist, well, a party of the communists,
Hmm.
and they criticize, they point out the flaws in Quarmby's strategy,
Yes.
which is a nice thing. And I think that's a nice touch of realism that there's not just one resistance,
No.
there's all different groups
But
vying against each
there's the
other as
communists
well as
and
the.
there's Quarmby.
Mm.
The communists are at the same time part of Quarmby. They operate as part within Quarmby as a resistance movement, but at the same time they keep their own structures and organisation and policy as well as a communist party in that situation would do. Yeah, we meet Anthony Bate, don't we, as Barry later on in the thing, who's a
Hmm.
very effective spokesman for the communist position there. And
Mm.
we meet him just as everything is pretty much falling apart for the Benedicts. So they end up being involved in a rescue mission of Tom Weston, together with Claire Weston. We meet people like well, there's another Quarmby played by Peter
Peter
Barkworth
Bartler.
who gets murdered. That's right, and so they end up having to look after Tom and
Hmm.
Claire. That and Claire is realizes that Tom is in such a state and isn't going anywhere, so she takes a decision to do him in and gives him the
Mm.
little black tablets that are the death tablets, aren't they? The happy pills, as I
Mm.
think they're
She gets
called.
this lovely speech. Well, because she knows, as he says, that he'll be made an example of and be tortured. So he says, even though I didn't love him,
Yeah,
I have some pity.
yeah,
I've got
that's it.
room for that.
So the Benedicts are put in a position where they've now got to dispose of a body, and Frank drives him out and tips him over a bridge into the Thames, but they don't know they're being watched. And so there's all
Mm.
sorts of photographs and things like that. And so Norman, together with his new boyfriend, Detective Sergeant Brian Arnold, who is
Mhm.
ostensibly Hobson's private security, but he's actually spying on him for Norman. They turn up at the Benedict's flat. Things are not heading in a good direction for the Benedicts, are they? Their deal
That's
is
one of
done.
the
Mm.
themes of that. This something I like about this series
Yeah,
is that where you are in episode one, everyone goes on a. Nobody is in the same place. You
yeah,
think everything's been set up in that first episode. You think you know who's who, and then
uh-huh,
everyone's going to go on this big journey. As you said,
yeah.
Tom Weston, he seems like he's going to be the bad guy, and then it turns out he's secretly a communist, and he go and probably it's not really science fictiony, but it goes a little bit prisonery when he's
Yes.
put into a psychiatric hospital to
That's
be
one of
sort of.
the few points where there is, I mean, we'll possibly touch on later series, things like
Mhm.
1990. That's one of the few points where there's a bit of a connection between the two series. That again, there's this use of psychiatric hospitals in the series
Mm.
1990 from the end of the 70s. And there's also the one cast crossover, which is Graham Crowden.
Yeah, yeah, we don't really mention Graham Crowden part in this,
Well,
who's
there's all sorts of actors turn up very briefly, aren't they, for one or two episodes. Crowden
mm,
plays a tramp who's ended up in the psychiatric prison detention center and basically is sent man, assassinates Peter Barkworth's character. He's a Quarmby. Peter Barkworth, just referred to as
which I
Quarmby,
was
I think.
quite pleased about actually, because Peter Bartworth's Quarmby is incredibly smug
Yes, he is.
and character who's
Yes, he is.
you just using Graham Crowden's character. We
Yeah.
never find out his real name. He's just called
No,
the
Quarmby.
dirtiest man,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and but he miscalculates, and there you are, ends up
Well, as we say,
killed.
I think he's just in two episodes, isn't he? And
Mm.
what we get throughout this series is we get points where it's blimey, it's so and so. Oh, look, there's so and so. Can I just take 30 seconds just to read through the list of notables who turn up
Hmm.
briefly in it and they're then gone in one or two episodes? So, deep breath. Michael Corvin, Norman Bird, Anthony Bate, Dinsdale London, Graham Crowden, Richard Vernon, Robin Ellis, Richard Herndl, John Rhys Davis, Peter Barker, James Grout, Windsor Davis, Andre Moran, Stephen Yardley, William Simons, Ray Lon, and Elizabeth Adari. Thank you.
What a splendid cast we
Many
have.
of
It's
them were
all.
right at the beginning of their career. People like
Mm.
John Rhys Davis and Elizabeth Adari, who would then be in the
Mhm.
Tomorrow People. In fact, she doesn't speak in this. She just sets herself on fire.
So yeah, as I said, people go on journeys. So you think you know where you are in the first episode, but practically everything is going to be changed, apart from Norman, who that the fact that he'll have a few wobbles
Oh, yeah. And we
along the
find out that
way.
little bit about his private life, don't we?
Hmm.
Having reached the point where we think we know who he is, we then discover well, first of all, he's gay, we discover, and
Mm-hmm.
that he has that relationship. He develops a relationship with Sergeant Arnold,
Mm-hmm.
which somewhat comes as a surprise to us. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
very end, well, first of all, there's big spoilers here.
Mm-hmm.
He orders Arnold to shoot and kill Hobson. He's been planning all along to groom Chris Hobson to take over from his dad. But he does show an act of mercy because he agrees that if Frank Benedict takes one of the happy pills and kills himself, that Eleanor Benedict will be allowed to go free and to go off and join their children in Canada, which
Mm.
it appears that he's keeping his word. We see her go off escorted by a guardian, but as far as we know, he's genuine there. He's letting her go. We don't absolutely know whether they're not going to
Mm.
get outside and he's going to put a bullet through the back of her head, but it does look as if there's that little bit of humanity about Norman there, which
He
is
does have that humanity. In
surprising.
many ways, he's kind of like Sir Humphrey. from Yes Minister
Yes,
series,
yes.
but not very funny.
No,
But
he's a
he has that.
fascist.
Yeah, he's a
He's
fascist.
absolutely a
And
fascist, but
mm,
he sincerely believes that what he's doing is for the benefit of the country, which I suppose you
mm.
can also say about Sir Timothy Hobson, because although
Oh,
philosophically he's not a fascist, what he's doing is running a fascist government. So that it's not much of an
absolutely.
excuse. Yeah,
He
and he
kind of sleep. There's a line, and I was just looking around for my note. I was looking around for my notepad,
democracy
which
is a
is
form of group suicide.
yes,
Not that
that's a
one.
great
That's the
quote.
one. Yeah.
And somebody else later says about him, we can see he's a good, compassionate man
Yeah.
but it'll turn into barbed wire and machine guns,
Yeah. That's right.
which I think is a
Absolutely.
well observed one. And I find it interesting. What I find interesting about Sir Timothy Hobson as a character, apart from the fact that at first he seems like a bit of a patsy
Yeah.
and he's easily Norman runs rings around him, and then he turns out to have a rather more steel in him than
Yes.
you think. But you mentioned that about sincerity. I think that's the what I find really interesting about him is that he really does sincere. There's a marvelous bit in the second episode. I think he has this long conversation with an old friend of his
Yeah.
over
Yeah. Yeah.
dinner, who's the head of now the renamed EBC.
Richard Handel.
And yeah, Richard Herndon, and they're debating back and forth, and we'll talk a little bit about that style. Towards the end, he says, "But we were happier in the past." It's sort of like everyone knew who they were and what they were doing, and he sincerely believes that, and he wants to turn he's driven by this dream, this fantasy version of his what Britain was like in the 40s, sort
He's
of
no
thing.
Farage. He's no
Hmm.
Farage and he's no Trump. He's not somebody who's deliberately stirring up hatred in order
Hmm.
to further his own agenda. He's not that.
Hmm.
He's a genuine man who, look, he's whether he's being used or not, he's found
Hmm.
himself in a position where he's increasingly uncomfortable. At the end, in the final episode, he says that he has decided he's going to resign, he's going to recall Parliament, he's going to call elections, and the
Hmm.
end and disband the Guardians, and that's the point at which Norman has him shot and killed. Yeah.
Unfortunately, he's realized, but he is a
He
good study, I
misjudged.
think, of someone who goes in for the best of intentions, but it all gets
Oh yeah.
out of hand, and he
There's a couple
realizes
of
too late.
episodes I want to mention, highlight in
Hmm.
particular. Yeah, well, we've discovered already at one point that the they've reintroduced the death penalty, and we
Hmm.
discover in episode two, the logical approach, that
Hmm.
the hangings that allegedly are going on are nonsense, and then the sentenced people, the condemned people, are not being hung at all. They're being killed by lethal injection while they're asleep the night before. So there's no big build up. They don't get to have to worry for a day before they're murdered, which is a bit odd, I think, because there's a compassion there that perhaps wasn't entirely necessary if you are the guardians and the Hobson regime.
Uh,
Perhaps that came from Hobson himself, who knows?
I feel it's actually a kind of terrible pragmatism in that it's easier. They're trying to avoid any sort of struggle from the prisoner. I
Mm.
think there's an awful kind of common sense. Well, it's just more sensible
Yeah,
to kill
yeah.
them
Well,
in their sleep. And
well, this business about the hanging, the official execution being a fake comes back to affect a later episode. But I want first of all to talk about the
mm,
episode, episode five, Quarmby,
mm,
where Eleanor at this point does not know that Frank is a Quarmby. And
mm,
what she thinks instead, and she's partly right about this, is that he's seeing another woman. Well, he is. He's seeing one of the other Quarmbys and seeing Tua as
mm.
well. So she sets a private detective to follow him. And he's an utterly inept, comical private detective. It's one of the points in the series where we get some comedy in there. with this useless private detective wearing funny hats and beards and moustaches and that sort of thing. He's a genuinely appealingly pathetic character. He's fun. And of course, he discovers what's going on. He discovers that Frank is involved in the resistance movement. And he confronts Frank with this, and Eleanor is there as well. And Frank's only option at this point is to kill him. He has to kill him. The private detective guy even helps out, even goes along with that, and just relaxes on the because he realizes he can't escape. He relaxes on Frank's couch and lets him kill him. Eleanor is
Mm,
present. Eleanor is part of that, and Eleanor now realize what's going on. But oddly enough, that sort of brings them together because they've
mm.
now got a shared purpose.
That's ironic. I mean, it's a great scene. I mean, it's a
Mm,
lovely scene, and that's one of the, I think to me that's one of the big themes in terms of characters of the show is Benedict's
yes,
slow disintegration. He
yes,
starts off seemingly he's like master of the world. He has this annoying habit of telling everybody else what they're thinking
yeah,
and say, so I know how everybody works and what's driving everybody. And then that murder is kind of the turning point, and his life
yeah.
just disintegrates.
And just at the point that Eleanor is starting to become more, well, not involved in the in Quarmby, but aware of it and aware that Frank's involved in it, we discover in Massive Coincidence Part Two that her godfather is the electronics and sound expert, sonics expert, who is brought in to help track down the illegal Quarmby radio stations in episode 7. I beg pardon. This is Quarmby.
Mm.
Richard Vernon is the godfather, absolutely. Slarty Bartfast. And so that's there. And that gives her a connection to the Prime Minister, Hobson, which will come in useful later on at the series at the end. It's by calling Hobson that she prevents both her and her husband being just murdered by Norman and Arnold in the final confrontation. But of course, that leads to Hobson getting murdered. So, or that little coincidence, massive coincidence, part two. But the other episode I really, really want to mention is episode 9. I Want You to Understand Me, where
Mm.
we've got two parallel stories going on, both of which appear at first to be tangential to the main story, but absolutely play into it and reflect each other. We've got Chris going off to Oxford to stay with two old college friends who edit the student newspaper, the husband does. And it turns out he's been sent this cassette tape, no, not cassette tape, this reel-to-reel tape by Quarmby, giving their demands to release some kidnap victims. Now, rather extraordinary, the main demand seems to be bring the Queen back from Canada. These are no real revolutionaries, these Quarmbys, I tell you. Their first thought is to bring the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew's mum back from Canada. But then that's that. But then so Chris points out to them that if they are found in possession of this tape, they will be imprisoned, they will be tortured, they will be be killed, they'll be shot. The friend, I haven't got their names to hand, the names they play, characters they play, the young couple. He becomes more set on actually keeping it and publishing it because he feels he's got to make this stand for free speech. The character played by Michael Culver, in fact, but it becomes apparent to Chris that they are found out, that Norman's been following him. They are found out. They're going to be exposed. There is going to be big trouble for his old mates. So he goes ahead and wipes the tape, records some music over it without them knowing. Norman comes in, the Guardians anyway, come in and search the place. What can we find? Oh, an interesting tape. Let's have a listen to this, shall we? And it's some classical music on it. Chris Hobson thinks his mates will be quite grateful that he saved them from being locked up and all the rest of it, but they're actually furious with him and say, "Go away.
Mm.
We never want to see you again because you have stolen our agency. You've taken our agency away from us. You took that
Mm.
decision for us, which you'd got no right to do at all." So that's happening. And at the
Mm.
same time, we know that what's happening is there's kidnappings. Well, this innocent family living in the country, this innocent young couple, in fact, living in the country, the wife's brother turns up. They're completely non-political. The wife's brother turns up, bringing a man with him who turns out to be the kidnapped official hangman of England. And he needs somewhere to hide him, and he behaves atrociously. This kidnapper does, because he basically leaves him with them. The guy who's supposed to come to collect him and take him away doesn't turn up, so he leaves him with them while he goes off and sort out what's happening. And of course, they get on very well with him. The hangman is played by Norman Bird. Of course, you get on well with Norman Bird. He's lovely. So yeah, and he explains that actually he's never done any hanging in his life. He's never killed anyone. It's all done the night before and not by him. They get on
Mm.
very well with him. They play board games with him. They do the garden together, all this sort of thing. And then the Quarmby, who was due to turn up, turns up along with her brother. An unpleasant ending ensues. They promise to
Mm.
take the hangman away and take him into the country somewhere and release him. And then there's a shot heard from outside because he's just been taken outside and shot.
I was going to say that is. I'm glad you've mentioned that, brought that episode up because I think it's one of my
Yeah,
favorites
yeah,
of the whole run. I think that
yeah,
could easily work as a one act play. That
definitely,
I think that one.
definitely.
Yeah, thanks to Norman Bird's performance in part and the
Yeah,
twists
yeah,
and turns of it and
yeah.
the debates. And I think that's a really strong episode.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yes, it is. Well, you say
Yeah.
debates. Perhaps we should mention the most often heard criticism of the
Yes, I
Guardians.
think it is worth mentioning because there is a very stagey, theatrical kind of feel to this. This is a series about ideas rather than action. There's a
Mm.
little bit of action here and there,
Yeah,
some bursts of gritty 70s TV violence in it,
yes.
but nearly all the episodes, certainly in the first half, are these very, they feel like two-handers or three-handers where people sit in a room and they debate the issues.
It would be interesting to see, I'm not going to, but to
Mm,
tot up in terms of screen time, how much is spent in either Hobson's office or apartment or the
mm,
Benedict's apartment or Frank's office.
mm,
Because huge amounts of episodes, huge amounts of screen time in all the episodes, or most of the episodes, are spent in those locations, aren't they? Of, as you say,
mm.
two or maybe three occasionally, people sitting around debating the issues. And it's not the sort of television I think we're used to much these days, but it wasn't unusual for those days, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah,
Some of
certainly it
that,
has. I
yeah,
mean, Play for Today,
play for today. The
often had
the
this kind of style.
the power game, absolutely, which was a
Mm,
huge series. So much of that was Wilder plotting in his office. If you look back at Rex Firkin's Manhunt, you'd think that would be a real action-packed trip through occupied France. So much of it is people sitting in barns discussing what they're going to do next and so on. Brilliantly. For all upstairs, downstairs is utterly wonderful. It's almost entirely set in the kitchen or the drawing room. So they rarely get beyond there. So that is a criticism, isn't it? I would defend
Mm,
it absolutely because it's the sort of television, as we said, we don't get these days, and I think we're
mhm,
poorer for the fact that we don't get that sort of ideas television without explosions. At the same time as I've been watching this in the last week, rewatching this for something like the fourth or fifth time in the last week, I've also been working my way for the first ever time through The Professionals, which I had
mm,
never seen before, which I won't be watching again after I've seen it this time. I'd not fancied it back in the 70s when it was first shown. It hadn't looked like the sort of thing that I would take to. And well, I'm not actually glad to say, but though it's very watchable, I would absolutely stick with that opinion now because
mm.
it isn't about ideas at all. It's about car chases and bombs and shooting and things like that. Of course, that was a few years after this, but there we go. There we
Mm.
are.
Yeah, I agree. I've got a lot of time. I mean, possibly it is. they get the balance wrong. And it's interesting, there are some contemporary reviews at the time
Yeah,
that criticized it for its talkiness.
yeah.
But like you said, this went out on mainstream ITV
TV, Saturday
TV.
night.
So I love that they respected the audience to think this is something worth doing. And a
Yeah.
lot of the debates individually are very well done. I think they are really interesting to follow, and they give the series this marvelous depth to it. We find out their motivations, and it's as much of the people who seem to be ostentatiously on the right often have their ideas broken down and challenged quite a bit
Mm.
in it, as in the same way that the people who seem to be on the you instinctively you think their positions. Oh, that's terrible. That's a terrible thing to say, and people can be sometimes disturbingly persuasive
Mm.
in explaining. No, this is in the long term of sort of like it's good in the long term, even
Yeah,
if it's harsh in the short term.
yeah.
And I find that to and fro of the debate really, yeah, very interesting.
Well, it's when it comes down to it, it's a debate as to whether, from both sides,
Hmm.
whether the ends justify the means. That's what the serial is about from both sides.
Yeah, that's basically the theme through it. What is
Mm.
that and sort of like different kinds of politics and sort of. But I also quite
Absolutely.
like it. Also, it reminds me a little bit of Secret Army as well, which is another
Yes.
series about the
Yes.
resistance. But it also Secret Army showed some of the contradictions of the resistance and the moral places. I mean, there's
Absolutely.
a character. I don't. I'm just trying to look up her name. I think she's just referred. She might even just be referred to as Mrs. Quarmby.
Mrs.
Although we
Quarmby,
might
yeah,
not find
who
out
is
her actual name.
no, we don't. It's Mrs. Quarmby, and she's Frank's bit on the side, so to speak, isn't she?
Hmm.
At one point, as well
That's
as
it.
his Quarmby contact.
And she's ruthless. And I think there's another.
Mm.
Oh, unless I'm, and I apologize if I'm mixing up two characters. But there's one woman who seems to be. Oh, I love this resistance work. She's sort of like I find killing guardians to be extremely satisfying.
Yeah, that's her, isn't it?
And
Isn't that the same
yeah, I think that
character?
is her.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
not like my boring life before. And you think, well, yeah, there probably are people like that in any kind of
Well, it's
resistance.
sort of what happens to Frank and Eleanor, isn't it? That once
Mm.
she's discovered what he's doing, he's no longer the boring husband who she sort of regrets marrying. They've got a joint purpose. Yeah, although she doesn't actively get involved in it. And at one point there is a suggestion when Frank goes out to dump Tom's body that if anything goes wrong, she will have to make sure that both she and Claire take the happy pills, the suicide pills. And she's very uncomfortable about that. But you get the feeling she'd do it by this stage.
Yes, this is about people finding out either their hidden strengths or
Mm.
their hidden shallows.
We could talk a little bit about what came after the Guardians, because there was
Yes.
supposed to be a second series, and I'm sort of glad there wasn't, to be honest, because
Mm.
it there's that real down ending, isn't there? Where the bad guys have absolutely won. And the only survivor from the good guys is Eleanor. And Claire.
Hmm.
Claire's made it. Because Claire is at the end going to marry Chris, who is going to become Prime Minister. Okay, I felt that was a bit of a stretch, but okay. So there's the two women and Chris are the only survivors at the end, and Chris is going to become the new Prime Minister. But it didn't happen. The series was effectively cancelled because it hadn't done as well as they'd hoped it would. But it wasn't the end of political dystopia television in the 70s and beyond. So there's a couple of series, a few, no, there's not a couple of series. I've got a big list of series I want to mention there, but I'll mention them briefly. Okay, in 1973, we had three interesting things. We had Scotch on the Rocks, which was adapted from a novel by Douglas Hurd and Andrew Osmond. Douglas Hurd, Tory Home Secretary under Thatcher, and Andrew Osmond, which is slightly connected to the Guardians because in the Guardians, Scotland have gone their own separate way, haven't they? And we're talking about England as opposed to Britain. Well, this is about a militant Scottish independence movement who resorting to violence to secure the independence of Scotland. It's an
Mhm.
interesting tale behind this one because the SNP objected strongly, as one might imagine. The SNP at this stage were not the force they later became, but they objected strongly. The series was locked away in a vault and has never been repeated or released or anything else ever since. There were 5 episodes. We think there's 3 of them exist. So the Scotch on the Rocks. In the same year, there was a one-off play by John Bowen, who wrote half of The Guardian's Hail Caesar, which was initially for BBC Schools and then shown as a play in the evening, which was an adaptation of Julius Caesar in modern day, um, with um, with Anthony Bate as Brutus. And I remember what I saw that at school, and it's fantastic. I remembered it from school. And then the other one that year was the Donati Conspiracy, written by John Gould, which again has a premise that Britain is living under a fascist dictatorship, and it focuses on the efforts of resistance, which is called the Donati Conspiracy because it's around a Professor Donati, and also on capital punishment, the question of capital punishment. There was a sequel to that 2 years later called State of Emergency, also written by John Gould, and again, examining some of the same themes, particularly focusing on the capital punishment aspect of things. In 1977 and then 1978, 2 series of 1990 that we mentioned earlier, which takes as its premise the Labour government that returned to power in 1974 was criticised for all sorts of things, being in the thrall of unions and all this sort of business and bureaucracy and nationalisation, which in those days might have been seen as a bad thing by some people. These days, I think it looks rather attractive, but there we are. So all the perceived faults of that Labour government were magnified to huge size. They are this totalitarian social democratic government. And we have a journalist played by Edward Woodward, him, who is leading the opposition. This was written by Wilfred Greatorex, by the way, and particularly helping people flee the country to freedom-loving, wonderful United States. Oh how things change. Um, you did a mini series recently on Play for Tomorrow. Oh, well, before Play
Mhm.
Tomorrow, let's mention An Englishman's Castle, also from 1978, written by Philip Mackey.
Do you know, I was
Uh,
going to ask if you knew about that one
yep,
because
yep. An
I
Englishman's
might
Castle.
cover that one in a later.
Well, I'll mention it very briefly then. Written by Philip Mackey, grandfather of Pearl Mackie of Doctor Who fame, although she never
Mm.
met him because he died before she was born. In which the Nazis won the Second World War, and decent old Kenneth More is a television writer writing a soap opera, compliant with his Nazi masters, but at the same time having an affair with a Jewish girl, which sort of blows up in his face and forces the decision. Play for Tomorrow, as we said. Several of the plays in Play for Tomorrow have this totalitarian
Mhm.
Britain aspect. They did die off after 1979, after the election of Thatcher, and after they're much more sporadic after that. We've got
Mm.
Knights of God in 1987, which is it's different from the others because it's not set against a contemporary background. It's a future
Mm.
after presumably some sort of war disaster where you've got
Yeah.
these it's you've got a theocracy
Yeah.
being
It's
run by
kind
the
of
Knights of
aimed
God.
at a different audience, I
Kids,
think.
it's
It's
kids, yeah.
designed as a tea time
A kids
adventure
show. Yeah.
series.
Kids show written by someone called Richard Cooper. It's worth looking at,
Mm.
particularly for the cast. And then the one I would say is the ultimate expression of this was the 1988 adaptation of Chris Mullins' novel, A Very British Coup, a Labour Prime Minister being elected on a genuinely left-wing advantage, and all the forces of the state mobilizing to bring him down. Oh, look, I won't give a spoiler for how that ends because you'll no doubt discuss that another time, perhaps. Who knows? But that is hugely powerful as a depiction of how the state can make sure that it doesn't end up being led by policies that it doesn't like. Well, we can either look at the very British coup to see that, or we could look at the political assassination of Jeremy Corbyn a few years ago, where all sorts of a state apparatus was brought into play to destroy Corbyn.
Mm.
But hey, look, I've made it clear my political perspective. If people don't
Oh
agree
yeah,
with me, that's fine. That's fine, of course.
that's fine.
So there were a whole load of things in the 70s, a fair fewer things in the 80s because the ruling class had already won pretty comprehensively.
So would you? I think we've reached sort of a summing up time for the Guardians. I mean, like I said, I've enjoyed watching it, and I love the depth of it. I'm actually surprised that they planned a second series because
Mm.
to me it works
It's a
perfectly
one-off story,
well
isn't it? Yeah,
as a story, and
yeah,
I think that it's a downbeat ending, but I think it's a realistic ending that
yes,
the
yes,
the machine rolls on. I
exactly.
think.
Exactly. No, I'm really pleased they didn't do a second series, to be fair. You'd have needed
Mm,
an entirely new set of characters, presumably, as well, as you'd only got two left in the
mm.
country and one gone abroad.
It feels like a second series could have only really repeated the story
Yeah,
with different people.
yeah.
So I would invite you now. So like, would you like to sort of like sum it up? How you feel about the show that you've spent a lot of time with
I
over the
have.
last.
I have. Yeah, it's something I return to every few years anyway. I absolutely love it. I've written about it more than once. I'm doing so again because I'm doing a Silver Archive book for Obverse. I say I'm doing it. I haven't started writing it yet, but that's due probably sometime next year to have finished that, where I'll be looking at all of these 70s dystopia. Yeah, I think it is a tremendous series. I mean, it's got an incredible cast, hugely high quality writing, particularly the episodes by John Bowen. I just went through and I just highlighted the episodes I particularly wanted to mention or my favorites or whatever. And they're
Mm,
almost all John Bowen episodes. His were the highlights of the thing. I mean, six out
mm.
of seven, I beg your pardon. He wrote 7 out of the 13 episodes, so he clearly was seen as the lead writer on the show.
He does seem to have had a quite remarkable career. I feel that there's a book in probably John Bowen at some
Definitely,
time about
definitely.
his. Because
Yep.
yeah, I'm a big fan of his ghost stories. That's the first thing that comes to
Yeah,
my mind
yeah.
when I think about him.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and so many more. I mean, I did mention some of them before. Go on, I'll mention them. Power Game, Mystery and Imagination, Villains, Dead of Night, Lord Peter Wimsey. He did. I think it was the Bologna Club one he did there.
Mm,
High Caesar, Ghost Stories, Play for the Day, Wild Alliance. He wrote an episode of that. And again, as I say, Hetty Wainthropp. He was a writer for hire.
mm,
He was brought in to write episodes of things. There are not many series that he created. In fact, I don't know whether there are any that he actually created. The Guardians was probably the one that he had the biggest input on in terms of how many episodes he wrote, with the exception, as I say, at the end of his career with Hetty Wainthropp. Yeah,
mm.
good writer.
Good. Well, we've mentioned your the forthcoming Silver Archive book on
Hmm.
70s TV dystopias. In the shorter term, what are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm working on a black archive also for Obverse, which has now been announced, so I can talk about it. It's about the invasion. If people don't know that the Black Archives take an individual Doctor Who story and do a fairly sort of in-depth look at that, a small book length look at that. Mine is the invasion, and my contention is that the invasion is the most 60s Doctor Who story that was ever made, and I draw parallels with various other 60s TV strands and bits and pieces that were happening without wanting to go too much into it. Otherwise, people won't buy it.
Oh, and we want that. Definitely. We'll be
Well,
plugging
that's due
it.
out sometime next year. It's due out sometime next year. The 6th of December at Quad in Derby, we have got a Quatermass Day, the Quatermass event. We're showing the 3 Hammer Quatermass films, plus the 2 surviving episodes of the TV Quatermass Experiment, which will be introduced by Toby Haydock, and he'll also be talking about his book on that. We've also got, apart from Toby, we've got John Deere, a writer about all sorts of good telly and especially Quatermass. He produced the version of the Quatermass Experiment that was held for the anniversary of Nigel Neal at the Alexandra Palace a couple of years ago. So he's coming along, and we've got Bronte Schiltz, who is an academic who's written about Quatermass and Nigel Neal, and again lots of other stuff. She is much in evidence on the recent Hammer releases of Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2, and Andy Murray, not the tennis player, the biographer of Nigel Neal, again, who's all over those DVDs, those Blu-rays.
Brilliant. 6th of December. Well, in that case, I'm going to do my level best to get this edited with at least a week to go before that. So
that was tremendous.
Yeah. Well, it only remains me to say thank you very much for joining me today to talk about The Guardians, and in fact for getting me to watch The Guardians, because it's been really good. And
I've enjoyed seeing it again as well.
Oh, great stuff. And wishing you all the best. So thank you for your time, and thank you at home for listening. We'll see you again in the not too distant future.
Have me back again to talk about something else. I always enjoy coming on these podcasts.
Oh, thank you very much for saying that. We'd love to have you back on, and we will.
Anytime.
So, bye-bye for now. The Guardians was released on DVD on the 1st of February 2010 by Network. Very British Futures is hosted and produced by Gareth Preston, with guest Steve Hatcher. Music by Chattery Art. If you can take a moment to rate us on your podcast app, that would be much appreciated. You can get in touch with the podcast via verybritish.futurespodcast@gmail.com, follow us on X @FuturesVery, or visit our Facebook page. This has been a Phantom Frame production.